Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar centering equity and community engagement in regional clean hydrogen hubs hosted by RMI. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a minute here, wait for a few more people to come in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, now that we've topped more than 100 people who've joined us for this webinar, let me go ahead and officially get started. Welcome to our webinar centering equity and community engagement in regional clean hydrogen hubs hosted by RMI. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon or even this evening to learn about our latest report, which is called Delivering Equitable and Meaningful Community Benefits via Clean Hydrogen Hubs. A quick reminder, this webinar is being recorded. It will be posted on RMI's event page within 24 hours of this event. We are going to be sending out that recording to everybody who registered, along with other resources and contacts. So if you're able to stay for the full webinar, fantastic. If you're not, that webinar recording will be available to you within the next 24 hours. During this webinar, please feel free to drop any questions you have for the authors into the chat function on your screen. And we're going to go through the agenda right now. We are going to open with a keynote address by Dr. Satyapal, followed by a brief presentation by the lead authors of the report. Alexei Teterenko, my fellow senior principal on the Climate Aligned Industries program, will moderate a panel discussion with leaders from the U.S. Clean Hydrogen Hubs ecosystem. Finally, we're going to close with remarks from a representative from the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. With that as our lead-in, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Sunita Satyapal. Dr. Satyapal is the director for the U.S. Department of Energy's Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office, and she coordinates activities across offices for the U.S. DOE hydrogen program. Dr. Satyapal is responsible for more than $1.6 billion in hydrogen and fuel cell research, development, demonstration, and deployment activities. And she coordinates more than $9.5 billion in hydrogen activities across the DOE. Dr. Satyapal has more than 2.5 decades of experience across industry, academia, and government. And she coordinates international hydrogen activities as the vice chair of the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy. She received her PhD from Columbia University. She did postdoctoral work in applied and engineering physics at Cornell University. And as you can imagine, Dr. Satyapal has numerous publications, including in Scientific American. She has 10 patents and a number of recognitions, including 2 presidential rank awards. So please join us virtually in welcoming Dr. Satyapal.
Thank you so much, Julie. It's such an honor to be here today. And so I first and foremost would like to thank RMI, all the organizers, really for the topic here. We've had so much interest in hydrogen, again, over the decades, but especially the last couple of years. And as you know, we stood up a whole new office of clean energy demonstrations, and my colleague will join shortly from OSAD. But again, this topic is so critical, and just a big shout out and thank you for the report, and really look forward to the rest of the webinar. So what I'd like to do is just set the stage, if we go to the next slide, and talk about the overall program and the national strategy. Again, this is not a DOE strategy, it's all of our collective, the national strategy. And if we start with the big picture, on the next slide, again, as a reminder, the sense of urgency, climate, energy security, resiliency, obviously the environmental justice piece. But if we look at US energy consumption, was shown here on the pie chart, you can see renewables at 13% for the first time in history a couple of years ago, surpassing coal. And you can see all the diverse options, but we still rely very heavily on fossil fuels. So we have to look at the big picture. And if you click once more, I want to emphasize the Biden administration's strong goals. So net zero by 2050, and very ambitious interim goals, as you can see there, including a clean grid by 2035. So basically going from 40% today to completely clean in 11 years. And then it's not just what these goals are, but how do we actually achieve them? And so really wanted to emphasize the bottom right here, the priorities for all Americans, energy, environmental justice. For example, the Justice 40 initiative, as I think most of you know, 40% of specific federal investments where benefits go to disadvantaged communities. So I think this is very much front and center. So this is energy consumption. And if we go to the next slide, you can see CO2. Again, this is a huge challenge, again, for all of us, challenge of a lifetime. You see the 6 billion on the y-axis, CO2, and you can see all the breakout by sector, and you can see our goals overlaid there. So again, a huge challenge. And we need all the tools in the toolbox, and hydrogen is one of them. So obviously for heavy duty transportation, again, industrial, you can see all the potential places where hydrogen can play a role. And if we go to the next slide, as I think everyone knows, huge progress under the administration, bipartisan infrastructure law, 62 billion for DOE, 9.5 billion of which is clean hydrogen. Lots of activities on the RD&D side, and of course the hubs. So you'll hear a lot more. And a big congratulations again for those online who are involved in the hubs. And then the national strategy and roadmap, which I'll talk about, and then obviously the tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. So again, that's really to set the stage. And if we go to the next slide, what I'll cover is the national strategy. And again, my one request to everyone is this is not just our strategy, it's our collective strategy. And there are three main pillars. And we had lots of good feedback. Again, RMI was involved in listening sessions and many of you as well. So the first is target strategic high impact uses for hydrogen, so especially those hard to decarbonize sectors. Second is we have to reduce the cost of hydrogen, and regardless of subsidies long term. And then third is focus on regional networks. So the concept of the hubs, how do we look at co-locating large scale production and end use? And then at the bottom, you can see a lot of enabling activities, good jobs, workforce developments, stimulating private sector investment, safety, all those different pieces to achieve that high level vision of affordable clean hydrogen for a net zero carbon future and a sustainable, resilient, and equitable economy. So again, that's all of our collective national vision there. So if we go to the next slide, we'll go through each one of these. And so here, basically the goal or national goals are 10 million metric tons of clean hydrogen by 2030, double that by 2040, and then 5 times that by 2050. And if we can achieve that, and again, it's not just production, it also entails the end use, so strategic end use, that would enable 10% of total emissions reduction. So again, if we're trying to get to net zero, 10% is really significant, huge opportunity for jobs. And so the bar chart basically shows we start with existing uses, so ammonia, refineries, and you can see a lot of uncertainty there at the dashed lines. And then we see scale up across different market segments and sectors. And if you click once more, what I want to really emphasize is there's a lot of uncertainty here. So if you look at the dark green, those are core scenarios of how much hydrogen for each of these sectors. And there's lots of analysis behind this. And then the light green, the top shows more optimistic scenarios. The bottom shows more conservative scenarios. Again, you can see, industrial plays a big role, looking at heavy duty, medium heavy duty trucks, energy storage for a clean grid. So again, these are different scenarios, and hopefully you're all familiar with our liftoff report. There's lots of analysis here, but that gives you kind of a big picture. Second, the next slide is basically strategy 2. And this is an example where we had feedback from thousands of participants, and there are lots of challenges for hydrogen. Again, we don't want to overhype, but because we still need infrastructure, there's safety, there's a lot of challenges, but the number one is still cost. We have to reduce cost to have a competitive and sustainable market. So the next slide, I think hopefully most of you know, a couple of years ago, or when President Biden asked our secretary, what can we do to really accelerate progress towards our meeting our climate goals? That was the beginning of the Energy Earthshot initiative. So hydrogen shot was the very first one. Again, in the US, hydrogen is only $1.50 or less from natural gas. And so we're really aiming to unlock that market potential and get to that fivefold increase, that $1 for 1 kilogram in 1 decade. So that's kind of the goal, but we're looking at, all different options there. And that's ultimately, again, without subsidies. And so the next slide basically shows strategy 3, which is the regional networks. And I think everyone knows, of course, the hubs, and the map shows our original request for information feedback, where we had stakeholders submit kind of where they could see the potential for large scale production and demand. And then the next slide shows, of course, the big or before we get there, the guiding principles slide I wanted to emphasize in the strategy. And this, I think, is really, really critical. And I'd like to request for those maybe to think about this more. Again, the strategy is required by law to be updated at least every 3 years. And here we got lots of good feedback from stakeholders from across the governments on, not just getting to market, but how do we do this in a holistic way, foster diversity, equity, inclusion, energy, environmental justice. So really wanted to provide this as a framework, perhaps as the hubs, and you have further discussion here. And then speaking of hubs, I think the next slide goes to the actual selection. So really big news having the president announce, and of course we'll hear a lot more throughout the webinar, but very exciting news. And from my colleague from OSED, we'll talk more about the hubs. And so now if we keep going, I think the main thing I wanted to end with maybe we'll go to the next slide, is the whole of government approach. And for those who are not familiar, we've launched a hydrogen interagency task force, which is really at the White House and deputy secretary level. We have 11 agencies and specific working groups on supply and demand at scale, infrastructure siting, permitting, really of the analysis, how to ensure a competitive supply chain, and then a cross-cutting team, which focuses on workforce equity and justice. So I wanted to especially highlight that. And if we go to the next slide, emphasize this piece of it, which I'll end with on the next slide, basically giving you a kind of a preview of some of the strategies that we're thinking about in terms of advancing equity, environmental justice perspectives. And so a very strong focus on listening sessions, engaging. We did this throughout the development of the national strategy. And now, of course, that the hubs are announced, and it's great to even consider this webinar. Again, a shout out to RMI of way of gathering feedback. A lot of interest in safety. How do we really ensure the benefits, lower the barriers, workforce developments, diversity, equity, inclusion. And there's a lot of questions about capacity and, building the skills, lots and lots of questions about hydrogen. And then, of course, the permitting, the siting. And because we have the Hydrogen Interagency Task Force now, the HIT, it's not just DOE. We're bringing in, again, all the different agencies and coordinating. And then, of course, we can't talk about open funding opportunities, but hopefully you saw that we actually did have one, again, across offices, across DOE, specifically looking at community benefits plans, how do we develop best practices, lessons learned, and then also especially on siting, infrastructure, permitting, and then frequently asked questions as well. And so with that, again, it is really an honor to be able to come today. I think the next slide really just talks about a lot of the resources available. So feel free to go to hydrogen.energy.gov. And that's for DOE. And again, it lets you go to all the different offices, fossil, renewables, OSED, and loan program office and so forth. And then save the date for May 6th. We have our annual merit review for those who might want to come in person. Again, we have roughly 1,000 people, have all things hydrogen and fuel cells across all the agencies. And of course, National Hydrogen Day and webinars and so forth. So just wanted to end with this to provide examples of resources that are available from DOE. So with that, a huge thank you again, and I will turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Satyapal. Grateful, obviously, for your time and insights. And I think it's pretty clear that there's an incredible amount of momentum that's happening at the federal level to spur all this action on. So my name's Chatyu Gamaj. I'm a principal on our industries program at RMI. And the next segment of this webinar is focused around our latest report and all on this topic, essentially, of meaningful community engagement and what that is looking like. So last year, RMI was involved in supporting several funding opportunity announcements across both the hydrogen hubs as well as the industrial demonstration portfolio. And what became abundantly clear and is abundantly clear is how we think about project success. And so on top of making the economical and technical case and business sense of this is the acceptance and prosperity of these affected communities that these projects are going to, and how we strive to baseline the impacts and burdens on a systems level and really maximize the economic development opportunities there. And so this unified requirement of community benefits at a federal level is a really significant step in that. And it really provides a blueprint for all future industrial energy developments, which we're going to see a lot more of given our advancement and targets in the US in particular. So coming out of this advisory process, there was certainly some key observations that we found as an RMI team in terms of just the process of developing these community benefits plans, what tools are important and available, and maybe some that need further refinement and development, and really calling out the ambiguity that still sits in this space for developers. And so we packaged up all of these items and a few more into the report that's published. Hopefully you will get some time to peruse that. But I'm joined now with some of my fellow co-authors, Hadia and Gareth, who sit in our community engagement team to discuss some of these highlights. Hey, Gareth.
Hey.
Hey, Hadia. Question for you, Gareth, to kick off with. So what are some of the common themes or must-do, I guess, community engagement aspects that we've certainly seen in the last year in multiple applications and reports?
Yeah, thanks, Jets. We've seen a few themes pop up, both through this process and from our research on previous community benefits agreements. One thing that we found is it's really best if community engagement happens early and often in the process. Obviously, this gives communities a seat at the table to raise any concerns, but it also lets developers identify and address issues before too much money has been committed. Second, we know a lot of companies need more resources, knowledge, and experience to carry out effective community engagement. Since community engagement is required to receive the Hydrogen Hubs funding, I see this program as not only giving companies money to develop a clean hydrogen infrastructure, but also to develop their capacity to do community engagement, which they can then use for other projects going forward as well. Finally, transparency is really key, both in community engagement and overall. There are a lot of first-of-a-kind technologies and facilities being demonstrated in this program, and it's important that everyone knows what these projects will look like and the benefits that we should be expecting. So really quick, I want to show one of the neat features of our report. If you can go to the next slide. Yeah, thanks. This map will allow you to click on 14 different locations to view a drop-down of previous community benefits agreements, their details, and whether or not they were effective. The idea behind this was to help companies emulate successful projects and avoid common issues.
Great. And so I think some of this and that tool obviously holds a lot of information and gathering. And I think that's just one of the many things that we tried to develop in this report to give folks an idea of this is certainly not the first time that these types of requirements are coming through, but there's, you know, precedent and historic evidence too that we can bring into this. I guess, Gareth, another question that's been sort of coming up, certainly from the developer side, is implementing these Justice 40 policy priorities. Could you highlight some of those and what's been emerging?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of questions about how to implement those requirements. Just as a refresher on the next page, we have, these are the 8 Justice 40 policy priorities that the DOE has identified for hydrogen hub developers to work towards. Frankly, I'm really excited about what the work that we've done in this area. We've developed metrics for each of the 8 policy priorities that companies can use to track the benefits they're delivering to disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. So here we have a screenshot from our report of 3 of the 8 policy priorities, along with the metrics we've proposed. And then we'll expand on the first of these 3 on the next slide. And we can see the possible programs we've developed to meet these metrics. So for example, if you want to track the second metric here, energy saved or reduction in fuel use by disadvantaged communities, one program you could run is providing assistance and inclusive financing for energy efficiency programs in low income and frontline communities. Again, all of this is available in the report online, and we just hope that it helps developers deliver meaningful benefits to communities and reach Justice 40 goals with their projects.
Thanks, Gareth. Moving on, and I guess the other section with Hadia, and I also tell the audience that there is a lot of stuff in this report, so we're just going to highlight a few of these things. But certainly back on the case studies of the projects that were maybe opposing and met some community resistance. What's some of the key learnings can you talk about for developers that can take away from this and hopefully do things in a different and better route next time?
Both case studies underscore the current reality that centering equity and getting that early community support is now just critical for de-risking all types of clean energy projects, and that this new social license to develop is going to continue to be a really important lever for delivering this just clean energy transition, regardless of whether developer is hoping to be eligible for federal funding. And so, you know, here I'd like to quickly highlight the first, or the second of the 2 case studies, which is the Midwest Carbon Expertise Pipeline that's being developed by Iowa-based Summit Carbon Solutions for a stunning $4.5 billion. This proposed 2,000-mile-long pipeline, which is considered to be the largest of its kind in the world, is going to run across 5 states, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, which are collectively home to over 12 million people. And so Summit had, and so we go to the next slide to have a quick look at the synopsis. So Summit had secured 75% of voluntary easements along the route, right? And they were paying landowners upfront 100%. They also reached out to 62 Native American tribes and nations, you know, to request consultations and elicit feedback. But developers have run into opposition from a very unusual alliance of landowners, farmers, tribes, and advocacy groups that have serious concerns about the potential use of eminent domain. And of course, last year in September and then in August, we had also seen the Public Utility Commissions of North and South Dakota vote to deny Summit route permits, essentially stalling progress. And one of the reasons that they cited for the denial was that the commissions believed that the developer hadn't sufficiently demonstrated how it would minimize potential negative impacts on the population, starting all the way from siting and construction through operation and maintenance of this massive pipeline over many, many decades. And so Summit is at the moment in the process of appealing these denials, but these delays are very, very costly, especially as Summit is reported to have spent close to $300 million sunk costs in right-of-way payments that it has no way of recovering. And it will likely have to reroute the pipeline if it's not able to receive the permits all across that 2,000-mile route. And so this is certainly going to be a project to watch in the coming months and years, with very important learnings for developers across the country.
And hugely valuable as we go into the design phase of the hubs and what we can be doing. Changing gears a little bit, I think there's in terms of the tools and what we can also use on a more practical level, idea. There's some interesting and fun interactive features as well that we've built into this report. So one of them being the stakeholder mapping tool. Can you tell us a little bit why that element is important and a little bit about it?
So this is something that I'm very proud of, and I'm very excited to share with our audience and with the hydrogen and all other clean energy developer community at large. And so we've prepared a video actually to demonstrate a new tool, and this tool is called SAM. Traditional stakeholder mapping is typically done manually, for example, using Post-its or with spreadsheets that can get pretty massive. For medium complexity ecosystems, or for simpler high-level visualizations, or really complex stakeholder maps, like this one of a 2015 mining accident in Brazil with 40+ groups and lots of complex relationships. In our latest report on US clean hydrogen hubs and best practices for two-way community engagement and benefits, I've illustrated a traditional, manual, and static hypothetical stakeholder analysis map of about 30 primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary groups, and all their interrelationships. It took over 4 hours with many decisions about shapes, colors, positioning, and drawing all the arrows for relationships. As it became more complicated and complex, it was harder to see very quickly who are the main players, where are the critical conflicts and alliances, and really for stakeholder maps to be useful for developers, community leaders, local, state, or federal policymakers, and really for anyone trying to understand the social landscape of a project. They have to be easy and intuitive, provide clear visualizations, and easily identify groups that are most impacted or have the most conflicts or alliances, or those who may be most influential and potential power brokers in the community or region. And so I designed SAM, a mapping tool to enable stakeholder analysis in a simple, clear, and digestible format to enable all decision makers, private, public, and community leaders to capture the evolving nature of projects and local ecosystems, to map the unique power dynamics underlying all interrelationships, and help shape more inclusive engagement strategies, and ultimately lead to the design of meaningful and responsive community benefits. Here's how it'll work. SAM has a simple interface that combines both the analysis of local power dynamics and the mapping of stakeholder relationships. Users can easily add or remove stakeholder groups that are relevant to their project or local context, and allocate high, medium, or low power to each group, depending on historic status or their current ability to influence project outcomes. For example, frontline and fenceline groups can be higher power in a scenario where their consent or lack thereof can stall or cancel a project. Next, users can illustrate all interrelationships for each group, including specifying whether there is one-way or two-way engagement, regular or irregular contact, fractured relations, or active conflict, and also specify the direction of engagement. This is what the result could look like. And we can do this for all stakeholders. Project landscapes and local power dynamics are constantly evolving, and this tool will enable us to capture clear visualizations of each social network or each localized nervous system for all projects, and support informed decision-making for all clean energy projects.
Thanks, Adia, for sharing that. And as I wrap up, and I encourage folks to ask questions in the chat clearly about the report, and if we get a time to have a look, we're always available for questions and contacts as well. As we look to the next phase of this work, I think this is just the beginning of the Hydrogen Hubs journey as we go towards the detailed planning in the coming months. And I think what my colleagues Heidi and Gareth have certainly highlighted is, how do we help the wider ecosystem of hubs and other projects develop? Clearly there's tools, but setting this transparency, as Gareth mentioned, of these plans as a start, but how do we encourage hub to hub learning in terms of metric development, sort of engagement strategies, and obviously the labor side as well, and benefit allocation. And the sort of the elephant in the room is, how do we define these go, no-go stages for communities will also be critical. So thank my colleagues once again for joining. The next part of this webinar, we're actually going to hear from folks working on this implementation, and I'll hand over now to Alexi to kick off that panel. Thanks, folks.
Oh, Thank you very much, Chats, Hadi, and Gareth. That was great, and we will keep on digging in and move into interactive part of and a very practical part of our session. First of all, to briefly introduce myself, my name is Alexei, and I'm a senior principal on RMI Climate Aligned Industry team, leading our hydrogen initiatives here at RMI. I'll briefly introduce the panelists, whom you will see in a moment. And before doing that, I would also say that, in terms of our scope of work, when it comes to hydrogen, of course, Climate Aligned Industry team has been involved into several hydrogen hubs, as Chats has pointed out already, but we also have other initiatives ongoing, including doing some work on interconnectivity and interconnective infrastructure between the hubs. We have some global coalitions which are focusing on trade, and of course, community engagement topic is a very important topic for us, as we understand that without getting this topic right, we cannot have a meaningful and equitable hydrogen economy. I believe everyone who is on this panel shares that view, and we will have a vivid discussion on this subject. So, introducing the panelists, I would like to start with Angelina, who is the CEO of ARCHES. Those who are not familiar with abbreviation, ARCHES is Alliance for Renewable Clean Hydrogen Energy Systems in California, so leading California Hydrogen Hub, which is eligible to receive up to $1.2 billion dollars from DOE for the hub development in California. Angelina will be followed by Stephanie Keld, who is a senior energy policy specialist with Washington State Department of Commerce, who is actively involved into the development of another hub on the West Coast, Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Association hub. And this hub is eligible up to $1 billion award from the DOE following successful negotiations. Next, we will have representatives of development community. Tommy will represent Ørsted. Tommy is the head of business and project development at Ørsted for Power-to-X projects. And Ørsted is a member of the High Velocity Hydrogen Hub in Texas, which is eligible to receive up to $1.2 billion in federal funding. Of course, Tommy will be acting in his capacity of representing Ørsted, not the High Velocity Hub. We should be clear about that. But off we go. And finally, last but not least, we will hear from Robert Colvin, who is a senior manager for government relations at Fortescue. Rob has led Fortescue work on community engagement in the Pacific Northwest hub. So we've got a good mixture of very exciting speakers, and without any further delay, I would like to kick off this panel with the first question that I would like to put to all the speakers. And starting with, of course, the topic that we've just discussed, which is RMI latest report on how to deliver equitable and meaningful community benefits via the hydrogen hubs. So starting with Angelina, my question here would be, and call would be to share your learnings after reading the report and highlight any findings that you feel are relevant to the ongoing work that you are doing in your region. Angelina, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexei. And as was pointed out, thank you for your work and supporting us during the application process. It was good to have you on board with the RMI team and collaborate and ensure that we have a good platform that we can all collectively work on together. It was wonderful to hear from Sunita and the DOE and the commitment to community benefits and making sure that we have an equitable and a just transition. And thank you also for the overview of the fabulous report. I can't agree with the findings more than what the team already identified. Transparency is absolutely important. Engagement is absolutely important. But I'll tell you one aspect that we're finding here that we're understanding lately in terms of delivering the projects and rolling out the specific proposal is the fact that there's a lack of education and community understanding. There's a very high degree of curiosity about hydrogen. I'm speaking hydrogen specifically because it is a complex issue in terms of, is it green hydrogen? How green is green hydrogen? What does it really mean? Does it accelerate the energy transition and allow us to achieve our decarbonization and clean air goals faster? Or is it a secret conspiracy theory to ensure that fossil fuel lasts forever and never goes away? So we've got a lack of understanding in terms of the sources that actually make hydrogen and what is clean hydrogen, and then the end users. If you're using it in the power sector, if you're using it at ports and shipping, if you're using it in the transportation sector, offsetting diesel. So because it is a complex resource and a wonderful resource, I mean, ours is a green hydrogen hub. We see this as capturing sunshine in a bottle, or an electric fuel that is carbon-free and the emissions are just pure water that you can drink. But getting that message across to sometimes a curious, slightly skeptical community is an effort that all of us have to undertake and figure out how do we engage in that educational process that then allows us to come to a meaningful community benefits plan with the frontline and fence line communities around these projects that understand the tangible benefits that will result from this project and can actively engage to come up with a meaningful agreement that encompasses all of the communities surrounding those projects. So it's been a very, very educational and exciting process for us. We also published our community benefits pathways on the website, which is our plan for a plan in terms of what are we going to do, how are we going to engage with communities, the specific task force that we have actually identified as the community benefits monitoring team that I can talk about later, that has a very important role in ensuring that those benefits actually reach the communities they're intended to, and then having conversations with the communities of what shape and form that plan will take. And there's a variety in shapes and forms that those plans can take. Some communities want a very specific legally binding document. Other communities want a more fluid, flexible document that can be adapted over time to reflect changing conditions. So we don't have anything set in stone, and I think that's what the RMI plan also shows, that this is an evolutionary process, that this is a give and take, that this is a relationship building process and a trust exercise, an educational process in many instances, and we all have to work together in order to ensure that we deliver the best projects and we accelerate decarbonization in the process and can have a carbon-free economy by 2045, specifically in California, as we have committed. And we see hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, as a major vehicle for achieving those goals. So thank you for all the hard work. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Angelina. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I would like to now put the same question to Stephanie. Stephanie, what are your main takeaways? What resonated, what maybe not?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a real honor to be here. I wanted to thank you for the way that you've structured your report too. I love the fact that you're really honing in on the meaningful engagement and the Justice 40 components, because I think there's probably a little bit less clarity for a lot of people about how to approach those kinds of benefits and components of a community benefits plan as opposed to maybe the workforce pieces. So I'm just glad that that's something that you're leaning in on. And I wanted to note that I don't think my slides need to be up right now, but I think we're getting there. I wanted to just, I guess, recognize I really appreciate the overall focus on the lack of procedural equity that's been noted in a lot of your case studies, and the fact that projects have been delayed or challenged based on how communities are engaged, when they're engaged, and how much opportunity they really have for influence. I think that's a really important message as projects start to move forward. it's something that in the Pacific Northwest Hub, we are really trying to address, or have tried to address from the very earliest phases, by making sure to have a diverse representation of different kinds of partners and stakeholders directly on the board, so that they're really at the core of the leadership structure, both helping to shape the planning of the hub, but also, I think, representing that they are demonstrating to a community that maybe there's someone who might share their concerns or kind of understand their perspective, and that they might be able to reach out to them as the process moves forward. I think that makes a difference. I love that you spent time focusing on the important opportunities around tools like community workforce agreements, and that you talked about some of the challenges for having those go well, including trying to figure out how to distill a community's values and priorities, which might be diverse depending on who you ask. And really the question of who gets to represent that in the negotiations is certainly one that takes a lot of thought to get right. But I think they do present a lot of value and increased transparency for communities. So it's great to learn more about how those have played out around the country so far. And I actually was really appreciative of the flag about the legal agreements to protect those community benefits if a developer goes out of business or sells their development rights. I honestly had not spent a lot of time thinking about that yet. And I think that's something that we should dig in more on, because there are often changing circumstances in long-term business contracts like this. So thank you so much for raising that. I thought that was a really valuable note.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie, and I'm glad that this is useful, and all kudos should go to the team that developed, of course, the report. So next we transition to Tommy and Rob for more like perspectives on the same, but now from the developer's perspective. So maybe Tommy, you could share some thoughts on the reports too.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, first off, of course, thanks so much for having me here. This is a tremendously important topic for all of us. It's an important one for Ørsted. This is very sort of critical to our mission in creating a world run entirely on green energy and making sure that transition is a just one. So we have a lot of experience with this so far in the Northeast and also in Texas on the renewable energy side. And now, of course, looking forward to applying that for these PowerDex projects, which interact with very different communities. But a lot of those principles and the processes are still the same. I thought the report was excellent. I just sort of as an overall observation, I think it captured the sort of high-level themes very well, and then also dug into a lot of details. I like that it was pretty practical and tactical. It referenced specific government tools that can be used. It had specific sort of tips or suggestions, as well as policy measures that can be relevant for developers. I think it's a very practical piece of work and not just a kind of high-level thought piece for folks. So I thought that was really excellent, and the case studies were fantastic. Right, it's easy to think about this in the abstract, and everyone would agree, yes, very important issue. But to really read through some of these instances, some of them in the really recent past as well, or really unfolding right now before us, I think was really impactful. That was really great. I mean, I think the two pieces I found sort of super important. One of them, I mean, if you distill the entire thing down, right, it's this phrase of it being a two-way conversation, right? This process, and I think that's really important, right? And there's 2 points within that. Right? One is obviously we need to take input from communities as we're engaging with them. But the other is it's not a one-way conversation in that direction either. And that's important to realize too. And Angelina talked about education, and that's a critical part of it. Going in and actually explaining what you're doing and why it matters is really critical and helps a lot with project success, and is important obviously to the overall mission of the transition. And then the other thing I really like the report hit on is there's both a human and an economic imperative here. And I think it's easy, or maybe some developers would see there being this tension between the two, but really the incentives are, or at least should be, very much aligned, right? There's wanting to do these projects and wanting to do them well, and achieving both those goals is fully aligned with a good community engagement plan and approach and process and transparency and accountability there. So all in all, great work.
Thank you, Tommy. And Rob, over to you to close this first round.
Likewise, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. This is a very important topic for Fortescue. A couple of things that really stuck out and others have touched on, but the lack of procedural equity being an impediment to project development and the importance of two-way communication. So obviously you can't understand what a community needs or what their concerns are if you don't actively create opportunities for community feedback. So this requires more time devoted to community engagement and more opportunities. So a lot of this is just actually devoting more resources and time, but also making sure the balance of that time spent at public events and meetings is properly distributed between, presentation and community feedback or questions. It also requires more direct one-on-one engagement with community stakeholders and other creative interactive approaches. So I think that's a really important thing to recognize. And then with respect to Justice 40 metrics, I think they are a little high level for folks and not as clearly defined. And I think some of the RMI suggestions are a really, really good start. I think there's more that needs to be done there generally. It's important to solicit and integrate community feedback into plans for meeting Justice 40 requirements, and perceived benefits vary from community to community. Every community is different. So making room for that, I think, is also really, really important. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Now we will move to more specific questions for the second round. And maybe, Angelina, starting with you, would be good if you could highlight, specific features of the Arches hub and, what challenges you see there. And, maybe related to that question, you've already pointed out that transparency is super important. It would be great if you could share some, practical thoughts on how you are planning to ensure that transparency, not only in relationships with communities and broader stakeholder groups, but with the project developers themselves, and how you are planning to hold them accountable to the highest standards of, being equitable and engaging properly with communities. You might be muted, Angelina.
Sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Great. I actually had some slides that I would like to share, if that's possible, in terms of how we structured the hub, why we structured it the way we did, and that we had environmental justice, equity, economic leadership, workforce development, and hydrogen market viability as the main drivers in order to ensure that the hub was successful and delivers what Sunita pointed out was absolutely necessary, which is scale, steel in the ground very quickly, ensuring that we have a systems approach and that we drive the cost of hydrogen down and make it competitive with diesel and other fuels at this stage of the game. We created Arches as a public-private partnership to create a statewide renewable clean hydrogen ecosystem and market, and that was our goal. So we're focused on renewable resources because we are a green hydrogen hub, and the founding members are all of the UCs together, one of the largest research institutions in the world, all of our labor partners through the building trades together, so all of California's unions as a united front, so all of the UCs with the two labs working in Arches, two DOE labs, Lawrence Berkeley and Lawrence Livermore, working actively on Arches, so we have systems analysis. Our labor partners were very important because we see community benefits as a coin with two sides. One is, of course, as was pointed out by Ørsted, the human factor and the environmental factor, which is we want clean air and we want community benefits. And the other one is, of course, we want jobs and we want economic development, and we have to have that tangible process continue hand in hand. So two sides of the same coin. And we have the state of California supporting the hub as well. Next slide. So the way we created our ecosystem was we have 39 projects that we proposed to DOE that are throughout California. And we focused on actually production and distribution and offtake. Production is with renewable electricity or biogenic, mostly through electrolysis, some biohydrogen production as well. Transportation is with liquid hydrogen delivered through fuel cell trucks. Hopefully we have many of them, thousands of them on the roadways, going all the way up to the Pacific Northwest. We're very eager to of course, collaborate with the Pacific Northwest Hub, including with the Texas Hub. We're actually talking to Texas about the Houston to LA line of being able to have fueling stations so that we can have transportation corridors developed. Storage, we see storage as a buffering mostly because we want to, as a system operator, be able to adjust production and offtake so that we ensure that production meets the needs of offtake, and we very carefully calibrate that need. And of course, transportation is also pipelines. In terms of offtake, we focused on 3 major sectors. Initially, the hydrogen power generation with turbines and fuel cells, transportation with transit agencies and drayage and heavy duty trucking, and ports. Ports are huge users, so the green hydrogen for ports is very, very important. Next slide. In terms of Justice 40 and how we're focused, oh, can we skip this one? We selected the projects in a very equitable manner. Next slide. Okay, in terms of Justice 40, we wanted to make sure that our projects are inclusive and that they cover the whole state. We also have a very strong offtake proposal. We're starting with about 7,000 metric tons per year produced of hydrogen by 2032, where the hub is final and in full swing. With the 39 projects, we're expecting to have 190,000 metric tons produced. And by 2045, where California has to be carbon-free, we're expecting 17 million metric tons per year produced. So that is extremely important for us. Our community partnership, in terms of communities, we want to ensure that we improve the environmental health of the communities and the quality of life. Of course, increase the availability of high-quality, family-sustaining green careers and jobs, and a hydrogen market aligned with California community needs. Community benefits, we see very much in unison working with our community project partners. With our community liaisons, we already have community groups, and we have working groups that are actively engaged not only with our technical partners, but also with our community partners as well. And those working groups meet every 2 weeks, and we have a community benefits working group, a production working group. Actually, Alexi, you were leading some of those working groups with us. They're still continuing in full swings. We're going to be producing white papers with all of them. We have a ports working group, and we have an offtake working group, and we have a codes and standards and workforce development and safety working group, working together with the Arches team to ensure that we have close communication with all of our stakeholders. Next slide. So in terms, again, of the community benefits, to ensure that we walk the talk, we have actually mandated that all of our projects have a project labor agreement. So all of the Arches projects have an active project labor agreement, either already signed or in negotiation to be signed. 1% of the project budget is directed towards community benefits. And as I said, the community-directed benefits pathways, that is already a roadway for us to come up with a community benefits plan for each project that is governed and directed and embraced by the communities that are actually surrounding the project. And workforce development is a huge part of that, because the workforce for those projects will be selected from the zip codes. And we're actually looking how to establish partnership to ensure that women in non-traditional industries are, of course, included, that minorities are included, that information is available in different languages, and that we meet the community where they are and develop that community benefits plan together, whether it's legally enforceable or not, depending on what the community prefers. And then we've got the community benefits monitoring team that actually works together with the board, reports to the board directly, will be paid by Arches. And their job is to ensure that each project has a scorecard, and that scorecard meets the requirements of the project at every step of the way. And they will actually have a mechanism for enforcing that and making sure that those objectives are met. Next slide. Again, in terms of Justice 40 and ensuring that we meet the Justice 40 goals, when we looked at the system-wide project distribution of the Arches project, we discovered, and that's kind of the Andy Warhol painting that we're all very proud of, that the hub sites, the disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and air pollution actually coincided. And then we believe that the Arches project are going to have a tangible benefit right off the get-go. So the 39 projects, when implemented, are going to result in $2.95 billion in economic value of reduced health costs for the state per year. So year after year, you will have a $3 billion saving in healthcare costs. The hub pays for itself in a few years. That was a tremendous finding. We're also going to have over 200,000 family-sustaining jobs with green careers because of the PLAs. Another very important funding. And a total of $380 million going into community benefits, 150 into community benefits, and 229 into workforce development. So we think that that is extremely important to ensure that we engage everyone. We have a specific goal with tribal communities and environmental NGOs. Indeed, we have a couple of tribal projects within Arches. Hopefully, we're going to have more. We have a tribal representative on the board as well. And the community benefits liaison and community benefits working groups will, of course, inform the activities that Arches management, as well as the Arches board, takes over time. And I think that's all the slides that we have. So thank you very much for your attention. The benefits speak for themselves. I didn't go through all of them in detail in terms of air pollution and NOx reductions and CO2 and reduced deaths. But that is certainly a statistics that we have and that we are going to ensure that we can deliver. So those are the very practical approaches that Arches has taken to ensure that we meet the goals of not only Justice 40, but the goals that we have set for ourselves as a hub in terms of the economic benefits, the practical human benefits, the environmental benefits, and the jobs and labor benefits.
Thank you, Angelina. I would like, in the interest of time, I would love to dig in deeper, but in the interest of time, I would like to move to Stephanie, and maybe Stephanie, ask you to share some of your practical experience with developing the community benefit plans at the Pacific Northwest Hub. What kind of concerns maybe did you register while engaging with communities? What are the priorities that you've identified? How you've engaged those communities into the developing the benefits plans?
Yeah, thank you. And I will try to be super brief in setting the stage, but I think, so I'm Stephanie Selt. Again, I'm part of the Washington State Department of Commerce, but have been very closely involved with the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub development, especially on the community benefits side. We can go to the next slide. I think, as everyone is aware, negotiations are ongoing, but our proposal is to include green electrolytic hydrogen production and use projects across Washington, Oregon, and Montana. And we are doing this work in the context of really strong state and kind of policy context across our states around getting to 100% clean electricity and net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and also in the context of having some really strong environmental and economic justice policies in our states. So, for example, in Washington, we have a bill called the Healthy Environment for All, or the HEAL Act, that establishes important responsibilities for state agencies around environmental justice. We also have tax incentives that drive clean product and fuel manufacturing, including hydrogen, towards projects that use higher labor standards. So we're really infusing all of that into the structure of our hub. You can go on to the next slide. I think I'll just briefly, I touched on this a little before, but we have, I think, also these multiple structures in the Pacific Northwest as well, with this diverse and engaged board with these partners that are really at the table from the get-go. We have a lot of important partnerships that are driving towards creating those workforce opportunities and ensuring that the benefits are distributed around the state or the region. There are central structures to establish standards and accountability. And then, of course, the real work of any community engagement effort is going to be different in every region. And as long as it's done well, right, it's responding to the local needs, the local priorities, the local relationships that are built, which is why it's great that Rob is here, because he is involved in leading that work in our region. Can go to the last slide, and then I'll just pick out some lessons. I think the tribal engagement part actually is one of the things that is most important about our efforts in the Pacific Northwest. Having 2 tribal representatives on our board, along with 3 labor unions, environmental representatives, and others, means that it's not just tribal engagement in the Pacific Northwest, it's tribal leadership. And that has come across in many ways, helping to shape the way that the hub proposals are developed, as well as making sure that we are having relationships and conversations that are led by tribal leaders to other tribal nations in the region, to make sure that there are, we're avoiding surprises. We're inviting all, tribes to the table to help shape these processes. They're such an important, critical, play such an important and critical role in this region. So a lot of effort has gone into the initial communications, presentations, one-on-one conversations, traveling to meet with folks and bring those perspectives into the process. So that was something I really wanted to highlight that I think we think is really important in the work in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie.
And I think I'll just briefly say one. I know we're running short on time, but just there's work that's led in the hub. A lot of that is seen in the way that our regional priorities drive us towards green electrolytic hydrogen production. That's been really important in our market. The focus on using hydrogen wisely in hard to decarbonize sectors is important. And then there's work that other partners can do, like in the state of the State Department of Commerce. We're able to be looking at some of the other issues we've heard elevated in communities, like hydrogen combustion and risks for generating NOx emissions. There's not funding in the hub per se to study that, but we are seeking state funding in our legislature so that we can build some partnerships and do some additional testing and monitoring, and bring a lot of transparency to any data that we are able to generate, so we can kind of work in complementarity with the formal work of the hub.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie, and thanks for sharing specifics. We can see, how specific the stories are depending on the regions, and that would be exactly probably my also question to Tommy. Tommy, as you are working in Texas, which is yet another different state, and I would like to ask you, what challenges do you anticipate while working with the communities, or identified already? And also, what is your experience maybe of how to overcome those challenges, and how to enter into meaningful and equitable relationships with communities based on the projects that you've developed in some other regions in the US, maybe?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Obviously, Houston area is a kind of unique region, particularly when it comes to energy and the energy transition. As we look ahead here, I would say 2 things about the Houston area that are really critical. Obviously, one is a long history of economic development with the petrochemical industry there and various other industries that have really been an engine for economic growth in the region, and often at the cost of negative impacts to the local communities. And there's a lot of documentation around all of that. I think it's going to be very critical for us as we develop our green methanol project there and the other hub projects developed there, that all the ways that your report lays out, that we address some of those concerns. The other piece I'd briefly mention is on labor, which is really a critical aspect of this, and one of the important tenets of Justice 40, making sure that flows through there. I think people think of Texas as a right to work state, which it is, and maybe have sometimes the misconception that means no organized labor, but there's actually a lot of unionized labor in Texas, particularly in skilled trades, and those that are going to be quite relevant for this. And also really close and strong relationships in a lot of cases with industry and community colleges and apprenticeship programs that are in place there. So there's, I'd say, a really strong foundation that as we proceed with our work and the hub and this industry proceeds generally, we need to make sure that we are attentive to and address to make sure that the benefits when it comes to workforce development flow to the right areas and to the local community. in particular. So that's that on the Houston area. In terms of sort of how we have addressed this, you mentioned, I mean, most of the work we've done in the US has been on the renewable energy side. So offshore wind in the Northeast and onshore wind and solar, largely in Texas and up throughout other parts of the country. I mean, for us, the process for us, right, is identify and understand what concerns there may be about a plan, and see how much of that you can avoid. Where you can avoid those negative impacts, you mitigate those negative impacts. Where you can't mitigate them, you compensate for them, right? We had a project in the north. All of our offshore wind projects kind of follow a similar path, right? As one example, I was just talking to a developer from one of our New York projects the other day. They went through 60 stakeholder meeting or public hearings, and I think over 400 stakeholder meetings as this project was developed, which had a number of impacts flow out of them. They changed the spacing of the turbines and the subsea cables with input from the fishing industry from the initial plan. They changed the route design of where the cables come on shore based on local community feedback, and then put a host community agreement in place with that community, because obviously you're going to have impacts where you come on shore when you do any sort of development. So, and then on the positive side, of course, it's also important to focus on maximizing positive impacts, right? So in that example, not only were we looking at kind of mitigating and addressing negative impacts, but that project in particular, we put $10 million towards a training center, National Offshore Wind Training Center, that we're developing in a DAC, essentially for workforce development that's relevant to try to essentially overcompensate for some of the negative impacts and make sure we're bringing the community along in the transition. And that's the sort of thing. I think there are other examples. We just donated 1,000 acres in Texas, actually, of conserved prairie land to the Nature Conservancy, along with one of our projects. Again, just all examples of trying to seek to provide positive impacts as well as just mitigating and compensating for the negative ones. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks for sharing your experience, Tommy. And I'm trying to be equitable here with time, albeit we are, running into a big deficit here. And maybe Rob, I mean, I would like to pick up on the last point that Tommy has made about, how you make these benefits tangible. And, we are jumping back into the Pacific Northwest. And if you could tell us how you are approaching and planning to share those benefits with the communities in your activities in the Northwest. If you could do that in a couple of minutes, that would be much appreciated.
I'll be brief. Our hub project's being developed in a disadvantaged community, a coal community, with a legacy of coal mine closures and the state's last coal power plant due to be shuttered in 2025. Some of the concerns that we've heard from the community generally are, concerns about exporting H2. Fortunately, we're focused on the regional market, but concerns about water impacts, H2 safety, potential impacts on electricity prices, and even concerns about traffic associated with construction of the plant and operations of the plant. So got to be responsive to those concerns and also the priorities we're hearing, which are, workforce development, education, training, employment. Those are big priorities for the community, and economic development and attracting follow-on business investment. Also important, we're hearing from our neighboring tribal governments, they're interested in the potential business opportunities associated with the green hydrogen development and workforce development for tribal members in that industry as well. So, with respect to trying to live into that and provide, benefits that meet community interests, our project will produce jobs, a lot of direct job creation through construction and operations, as well as indirect job creation through the supply chain, the local supply chain, increases to local GDP, local income, wages, increased wages and local tax revenue that help support schools and things of that nature. We're in discussions with off-takers about co-location in the community and new business investment, community investment partnerships, especially in our local community college focused on clean energy and green hydrogen curriculum, workforce development and training, really important. Exploring business partnerships associated with the project with neighboring tribes, as well as workforce development opportunities in the industry. And proceeds from the purchase of our remediated coal mine land that we're going to put our site on, our facility on will be reinvested towards remediating additional contaminated coal mine land. And so that currently poses environmental health concerns, limits economic activity, undermines property value. So you can see the benefits really flowing from that as well. And I'll leave it there. Yeah,
thank you, Rob. And that was a great discussion. I felt like we could spend another half an hour unpacking, many aspects that you and other panelists brought up. But we need to move to the closing remarks, and for that we have one more DOE speaker, Suzanne Becker, who will make closing remarks, and whom I would like to introduce. Susanna is the stakeholder engagement specialist at the Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, that is taking a lead on Hydrogen Hubs program. So, Susanna, without any further ado, I would like to pass it on to you to share your thoughts and maybe reflections on what has been said at this panel too.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with this group and to sort of bring attention to this excellent report that you've put together. One thing that I was really grateful for in the report was the acknowledgement of sort of the open-ended nature of how the CBP and environmental justice requirements were written, which I think from some of the folks that we've heard from today, that is powerful in that it leaves the door open to be adaptable to the circumstances on the ground. But it's a bit of a double-edged sword because a lot of folks have been really hungry for more specific guidance and case studies. So just a huge shout out to RMI for doing this excellent work and providing a little bit more grist for the mill for people to continue to be creative and to continue to meet communities where they are with these plans. I know we're running a little bit late, so I'm just going to go super quickly and give you all sort of an update from the OSED side on where we are with these projects, and especially through the lens of our CBP work. Next slide. Oh, next slide again. Perfect. So as I think folks are probably aware, equitable transition is literally in our mission. So we're taking this very seriously. This is not a bolt-on. This is not an afterthought. This is really central to our selection and negotiation process. And I hope that that's clear to folks, just sort of how seriously we are taking this. Next slide. In the statutory language in the bipartisan infrastructure law for the hubs, they specify that they want production, transportation, and end use. But in our FOA and in the hub selections, you'll see, we've also got minority and disadvantaged local businesses. We've got workforce and training centers. We've got, all these great benefits that we see as just as essential to the nature of a regional clean hydrogen hub. Next slide. This will look familiar. As we start to piece the hubs together, it is creating this national network with the goal of hydrogen liftoff across the entire country. Next slide. And as Sunita very eloquently described, this is a whole of government approach. This is not just about the hubs or even just the national strategy. We have an absolutely enormous task ahead of us with climate change, and the hubs are sort of one of the keystones in our hydrogen strategy across the federal government. Next slide. And so the contributions that we're making to the whole through the hubs are, of course, this gigantic federal investment, one of the largest in the history of US climate investment, a ton of hydrogen, potentially up to 3 million metric tons of hydrogen per year once the hubs are up and running. Dedicated dollars for community benefits. Oh, can we go back for 1 second? I'm almost there. Tens of thousands of jobs, potentially hundreds of thousands of jobs, as mentioned in the ARCHES presentation, and of course, greenhouse gas reductions. All right, next slide. And some of these you've seen before, but just, these are the 4 pillars of the CBP that we want to see in every single hub and in every single node of every single hub. So community and labor engagement, DEIA, investing in the American workforce, and Justice 40. Next slide. These are some of the sort of high-level guidance that we've provided, and I loved sort of the examples for ARCHES and Pacific Northwest, how you can kind of track how they're implementing this and how this is taking shape. how they are really coming up with clear metrics, how they are coming up for processes for transparency, and they are really addressing those 4 core areas really effectively. Another thing I want to point out with this is just these are community benefit plans, right? They're not final yet. So as we come to the end of the first phase of negotiations and enter phase 1, which is our planning phase, next slide. Folks are going to have enough money to start doing the planning work in earnest for about 12 to 18 months. And so those plans and strategies will start to take shape much, much more in the coming year. So I just want to flag to folks that these are not baked yet. There's still a lot of opportunity to get involved and to help shape the future of these projects and the community benefit plans specifically. Next slide. So along those lines, we have a ton of resources. I'm just going to throw these out super fast. And then this deck, I think, will be circulated so you can click through to the links and check things out in more detail. Next slide. So this is just sort of a laundry list of all of the different ways that you can get involved. So we have a ton of online resources. We have dedicated inboxes, CPB summaries, and going forward, we're going to have a lot of on-the-ground engagement that we encourage folks to get involved with. And of course, NEPA, which will be another chance for formal engagement with the Hub's decision-making process. Next slide. Some of what you can look forward to are small community dialogues, larger deliberative forums, and hopefully long-term trust and co-developed priorities across the hubs that reflect the actual needs of folks on the ground. Next slide. So we are currently in negotiations to create these cooperative agreements. So these are public-private partnerships, which are a little bit different than just like a grant. Detailed project work begins in phase 1. And we will, of course, these projects will be subject to NEPA. And OSED will have very significant engagement with both the awardee and the folks impacted by these projects in the next year to 2 years in phase 1. Next slide. This is just like a link library of all of the resources that have been mentioned throughout this presentation. Next slide. And here are a few more ways to stay connected with us. If you're not on our newsletter, getting OSED alerts, please do sign up. That's the very best way to stay up to date on these projects in real time. And next slide. And that's it. All right, that was super fast. Thank you all again so much. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for joining us and for sharing all of those different resources. I also want to thank Dr. Satyapal, our panelists, our co-authors, and even the people doing the Zoom. It has been a wonderful experience. And thank you, participants, for joining us for this webinar on centering equity and community engagement in regional clean hydrogen hubs. As you all can see from the report results, from the keynotes, from the panelists, their short presentations, and even the Q&A, this is an incredibly critical topic. There are things we already know that we can do to center equity and community engagement in any clean energy project, let alone through the regional clean hydrogen hubs. And there are things that we don't yet know and are developing the right skill sets, tools, and our metaphorical muscles around. We have been recording the session. The recording will be posted on the event page, so the same page that you used to register for this webinar. We will also have the webinar slides for those of you who have been asking. Our report can be found on RMI's website. In terms of the Q&A that you all have been diligently contributing to throughout the webinar, we've seen some key themes, things around definitions of clean and green hydrogen, around rights, use, access, quality of water, pipeline safety, the placement of projects, and certainly around capacity building for project developers. These questions will be answered after the webinar. And if you need more information about our community engagement and our hydrogen work, please reach out to me, Julia Thane, Senior Principal within the Climate Aligned Industries Program at RMI, or to Alexei Tedorenko, who is our Senior Principal focused on hydrogen, or to any of the co-authors of the report. Thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.